Hey folks, Sean here, and in this episode, I want to talk to you about the controversial topic of running multiple projects at once. When I say that, I mean it's advice that's given a lot in the startup world, which I've spent many years in. You often hear this from advisors, investors, anyone who has skin in the game, so to speak. The vast majority of them will tell you you need to focus on only one project or only one company at once. And look, first thing I'll say is I get it. That makes a ton of sense, especially if that advice is coming from a particular area, and that's someone with a vested interest in receiving a return on investment in terms of where they put their dollars. If you think about it that way, if I'm looking to raise money for the startup that I want to build, and I go to an investor and I get them to invest in my company, what do they want? They want me spending every waking moment of every day, week, month, year on that project, ensuring that it grows and becomes the most successful startup of all time, right? Why would they want anything other than that? They largely don't really care so much about my health, my mental well-being, any of those things, at least not primarily. Primarily, they're interested in getting their money back and more beyond that, receiving a significant return on the investment that they've made. So I understand those incentives are lined up in that way. It's probably not ideal because the data reflects that might really have the exact opposite effect of what everyone's striving for, but I digress. Now that's from an investor/advisor perspective. What if we evaluate this from your perspective? You as the founder, you as the entrepreneur. Now, obviously, you're going to want your startup to be as successful as possible. However, you, like me, probably are very well aware that the odds of achieving that level of success are very, very low. The numbers are borderline ridiculous. The vast majority of startups, the number people always throw out there is 90+% never succeed. The numbers are actually worse than that. I've done a bunch of content on it. If you check out some of the articles, I'll find it and I'll post it as a link to this podcast episode. But the numbers of reaching unicorn status are like borderline ridiculous, almost lottery level ridiculous. So having said that, that opens up another conversation in terms of like, well, what about from my perspective, like the entrepreneur, you, me, who I'm creating all this content for? How do we adequately protect ourselves from that failure? Now, a lot of us, we are comfortable stomaching that risk. Otherwise, we wouldn't do this work. But beyond that, most of us are not stupid to the extent where we do want to be able to try to protect ourselves and we do want to succeed. Now, I have evaluated that throughout the course of my career. And what I ultimately found out was that, like making investments financially, for example, you don't really want to put all of your eggs into one basket. That's like putting all your money into one stock. Well, what happens if that company goes bankrupt or doesn't succeed? You lose everything, right? And that there is the power and the value you get from diversification. So that's a whole other perspective that's not talked about when it comes to, you should be working on multiple projects, right? That's faux pas or super risky or going to cause all kinds of other problems, right? Well, that doesn't really speak to the fact that the entrepreneur probably wants some insurance, wants to ensure that they can be successful as well too. And what better way to do that than to consider not just working on only one thing, which might have the odds similar to that of playing the lottery, right? And that's the path that I chose. And so far, now I've been very lucky, but it's worked out relatively well, right? Much better than it would have had I jumped, headfirst all in to only one project when I had multiple opportunities to do that. It just never struck me as something that made a lot of sense. So I'm just broaching the topic here and providing some context from the perspective that often doesn't come up when these things are mentioned. Now, having said that, I'm not advocating for you go out and work on like 5 projects at once, like all at the same time, because multitasking is not a thing. Like people believe multitasking is a thing. I've tried it myself. It doesn't work. The data is clear on that. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that you can't work on multiple projects, just not at the same time. So like I've launched 2 products just this year already. So clearly I'm working on multiple projects, but some days I'll work on one, other days I'll work on the other. And now I have 2 products that have launched and I can pit my own products against one another. But if one is more successful than the other, I can redirect time, investment, whatever. And I want you to be able to do the same, or at least I want to challenge this notion that you really should never be working on multiple projects at once, because I think it's often misleading, and I think it doesn't come from a place of protecting and doing what's in the best interest of the entrepreneur.